What is the worst Classic Who Dalek story? In my opinion, it's Destiny of the Daleks. It's very interesting reading back on past reviews of this episode in the years since its release, as it appears to have had quite a turbulent relationship with the fandom. By all accounts, it was well received when it first aired, and it saw a surge in popularity after it was first released for home media. But those who are familiar with this story will know that it is steeped in production issues, script rewrites, and on-set problems that undercut a story that could have been excellent, reducing it to a shoddy mess. Let's talk about the good things first, because there are some good things about this episode. Lalla Ward is excellent as Romana too. In fact, she is without a doubt the best thing about this episode, all things considered. The idea that people think that a female doctor can never work is laughable. The proof that a female doctor can work has existed since 1979. Tom Baker is also good in this story, delivering more than a few funny lines. However, compared to his performance in Genesis of the Daleks, he doesn't seem to be giving it his all in this story. The Movellans are an interesting original idea for the episode, and I can honestly say that I think the costumes are brilliant. Sure, they look, shall we say, dated, but they're certainly interesting to look at. There are also a few decent sets in this episode, but again, compared to Genesis of the Daleks, they're not all that impressive. And as you can probably tell already, one of Destiny of the Daleks' biggest flaws is that, as a Dalek story, it follows on from Genesis of the Daleks. When this story was first broadcast, it had been nearly 5 years since the Daleks had last appeared, and due to the lack of home media, fans relied on their memories, word of mouth retellings, and novelizations to experience classic stories. However, in modern times, we can compare both episodes side by side, and the difference is stark. Compared to Genesis of the Daleks, Destiny of the Daleks just looks shoddy. The Dalek props look shoddy. The Skaro sets look shoddy. Even the external locations used for filming look awful compared to the atmospheric external shot of Skaro that we saw in Genesis. But let's address the pink elephant in the room. Davros. When it comes to Classic Who, there is a lot that I am willing to excuse. In fact, I'd go further. I'd say that Classic Who's reputation for wobbly sets and bubble wrap monsters is wholly undeserved, and that it hits far more often than it misses when it comes to costume design. But Davros in Destiny of the Daleks is an example of a perfect storm of terribleness that severely impacts the overall enjoyment factor of this episode. What am I talking about here? Well, Davros looks and sounds awful. Compared to Genesis, in which Davros was a cold, cunning, manipulative genius, Davros in Destiny of the Daleks comes across as a parody. The original actor, Michael Wisher, couldn't return, so David Goodison was cast instead. He does his best with the material given to him, but let's just briefly summarise what this poor guy had to deal with, on top of the fact that he was stepping into some pretty big shoes. Firstly, they didn't give him a new mask. They just cut the bottom off of Michael Wisher's Davros mask and gave him that to use. The end result looks terrible, as the mask doesn't fit, and it had already started to show signs of wear. Secondly, he resorts to shouting his lines a lot of the time, which stands in contrast to the more reserved Wisher Davros, who would only shout when he became angry or agitated. And lastly, Goodison had to push the Davros chair along the floor with his feet, which looks about as ridiculous as it sounds. I'd just like to clarify that I hold no ill will towards David Goodison whatsoever. I'm sure he did the best that he could with what he had. Unfortunately, the end result is poor, and as a result, the entire story suffers. It isn't just costume design that negatively impacts Davros in this story, the writing is shoddy too. This script was written by Terry Nation, and the script was edited by Douglas Adams. That's right, the Douglas Adams, as in the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The combined writing talents of the creator of the Daleks and the creator of the restaurant at the end of the universe should be a match made in heaven. However, Destiny of the Daleks sadly proves that you sometimes live to regret getting what you wish for, even if it sounds like a surefire thing. What's the issue with the script then? Well, it doesn't know what it wants to be. One moment the Daleks are being played for laughs, the next are supposed to take them seriously. One moment the Doctor is being flippant to the point where he appears detached from the events of the narrative, the next he's trying his best to seem serious even when the extras act like they don't care. The biggest flaw running through this episode like a giant splinter is that it suffers from tone issues, exacerbated by Douglas Adams' attempts to inject humour into the story. In any other context, Adams' humour and Doctor Who would be the comfiest of bedfellows. City of Death proves that. But having Adams' style of humour present in a Dalek episode is like mixing milk and vinegar. Like all Doctor Who stories, there are things to love about Destiny of the Daleks. There are lots of little tidbits about this episode that make me really want to like it, such as the fact that actor Tim Barlow was actually deaf, and yet he's able to hit his cues perfectly, with a little help from Tom Baker here and there. There's also the fact that this story is the first episode to depict the Dalek extermination effect centred on a specific individual, which will be used for the rest of Classic Who and also transition over to New Who. However, there is also a lot to dislike about this story, proportionally more so than any other Dalek story in the classic era in my opinion. The Daleks are described by both the Doctor and Davros as being robots and machines, despite the fact that they're supposed to be mutants housed in metal shells. The awful paint job on the Daleks does little to hide the poor condition that the props were in at the time of filming, and the studio lighting in particular makes them look tacky and cheap. There are also several errors in logic in the script, such as one scene where a Dalek explains why self-sacrifice is impossible for a Dalek, only for a squad of Daleks to become suicide bombers at the climax of the story. Or how about the rock paper scissors explanation for a logical empath, which makes no sense as rock paper scissors is based entirely on luck and has no strategy whatsoever. I could go on, but at this point I'm beating a dead horse. What do you think of Destiny of the Daleks? While I've been quite harsh on this episode, I am interested to hear any positives that people have to say about this story. Where do you rank Destiny compared to other Dalek stories in the classic era? Are there any Classic Who Dalek stories that you would rank lower than Destiny? Let me know in the comments below.